just from my own personal experience, like I can now understand how alcohol like ruins relationships, and not just romantic relationships, as you were saying, Mary. Like it could be obviously family, it could be friendships, it could be everyone in their lives.
So it's January. What did you do for New Year's, Carla?
Yes, it is. My God, thank God, first of all. 2024 was, at least for me, I don't want to say like a horrendous year, but it was incredibly challenging, probably the most challenging year of my life. And I'm really hoping that 2025 is not that.
I
But
hear
to answer
that.
your question, yeah, right. But there was a lot of good that came from it. Obviously, like I don't want to get too cliche, but with challenges, there's a lot of growth. And as painful as that growth can be, I think I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of those challenges. So that's a good thing that thankfully that has started as the new year starts. But to answer your question, Mary, so it's interesting because normally New Year's, I feel like is this time where there's so much pressure in terms of what to do and parties and being with friends and going out and destinations. At least in my world, there has been in years prior. And this is one of the first years I can remember in a long, long time where I just stayed in with family and didn't like try to do that. And it was really nice because we saved a lot of money. But I was also with my sister and my nephews, and it was nice. We just went out to dinner. We came back to her house with a bunch of her close friends, and we did vision boards. So it was
Oh,
really
neat.
cute. She had a bunch of like magazines out for us and just, different publications, and we just cut and pasted and colored, and like it was super just it was just so cute and wholesome.
That's a
And I've
great
never had that
idea.
kind of New Year's.
Yeah. No, that's a really great idea.
Yeah, she saw it on TikTok. And I was all about it. I was like, this is so cute. And we all dressed up in our like comfiest jammies and just like had champagne and literally just, low key.
Fun.
And I was very content with that. So,
That reminds me of that idea where you start on January 1st and you put a little post-it note in a jar every day about your best memory or something that happened that day. And then you take all of the notes out at the end of the year and read them, which I've also
yeah.
thought is a really sweet idea for a new
Yeah,
year.
it's really funny you mentioned that because I just watched a video the other day and it was something like that where someone had recommended at the end of every day of the year, you write something good that happened to you that day. And then at
Yeah,
the end of the
exactly.
year, you
Yeah.
can go back and you can read all of them. And I'm like, I really want to do that this year. It's so challenging though, sometimes either because A, you forget, or B, what happens if it's a shit day and you just can't be positive? It almost forces you to be positive. So,
Exactly.
it,
Yeah. You pick out whatever good did happen that day, and it forces you to focus on the positive instead of ruminating on all the negative
yeah.
things that might have happened.
Exactly. So we'll try it out. I'll report back later to see how it's going.
Okay. So, speaking of champagne, as you were, our topic for today is talking about dry January or Sobuary, as we might call it, and how so many people out there are doing the dry January challenge where you don't have any alcohol for the whole month of January. So, we want to get into offering some tips, inspiration, and just talk a little bit about alcohol and kind of how the changing views around alcohol are impacting people's decisions to drink. So we'll get into that a little bit more about the physical effects of alcohol, emotional, and also just how to support yourself through this month if you are doing dry January.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because some people have really close relationships with alcohol, some people don't. I did not grow up in a household where alcohol was ever like really part of our lives. Like my mom has been, I don't want to say sober, but I've seen her drink a handful of times my entire life. And my dad, maybe a little more, but it's never been like the center focus, which is interesting because we're Mexican and we do love tequila, but it's never been heavily, heavily present in our lives. So I never grew up with, even in college, like it took me forever to like want to drink. And even then, I would say post college into my adult life, it's always been a social thing. And if it's not social, like I really don't want it because I've always had a very hard time. I don't know if it's digesting alcohol or what, but I always do not feel well when I drink. So I've just chosen not to, or I just have never really developed the palate. Like I know I've dated a lot of guys or a lot of my friends are like, oh my God, I just love the taste of whatever. And I'm like, really? Like I've always thought it tastes like piss. It's never
It
been
does.
something that appeals to me.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
anyways, yeah. And then a few years ago, Mary, we had a conversation where you started to enlighten me a little bit more and educate me a little bit more around alcohol. And then I know you had mentioned a book around, I believe it was like Quit Like a Woman, which was so interesting. And unfortunately, I still have to read. But you mentioned a lot of really interesting facts in it that I think the majority of people don't necessarily understand in the world of maybe how would you say it in a PC way?
Yeah, no, Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker. She's a really good friend of mine, and she started a holistic recovery group for women, especially to help women overcome binge drinking. And back in the old days, it was called Hip Sobriety. And I taught the nutrition module about how to use food and nutrition to support recovery or to help support yourself if you are transitioning off of alcohol. And one thing that she mentions in the books that has always stuck with me is that we see now kind of that younger generations like Gen Z and even millennials are choosing not to drink alcohol. And she says in the book that those generations are going to view alcohol like our generation viewed smoking, that we all grew up knowing smoking was bad, it caused cancer. And, in the 60s, 70s, smoking was really common. Almost doctors would be smoking, and you see these ads of doctors smoking in their offices. And we discovered that cigarettes are incredibly harmful to the body and that they are a class one carcinogen, which means they directly cause cancer. And we now know there is no safe amount of alcohol to drink. And it used to be have one glass of red wine, or alcohol has some benefits. And yes, red wine does have resveratrol and antioxidants in it, but the alcohol, the ethanol, which is what alcohol is, when red wine is fermented, the grapes are fermented, it produces ethanol as a byproduct. And the ethanol is what causes cancer. So, all of that is to say that there have been numerous studies linking alcohol to several different types of cancer, and especially to breast cancer in women. And the larger point here is that we now know that there's no safe level of alcohol to drink. And a lot of people in the holistic health sphere and a lot of practitioners are coming out and saying this and discouraging people from drinking. And so that's why these movements like sober October and dry January are becoming more popular as more and more people are really examining their relationship with alcohol and seeing how they feel without it in their lives. And that's the point of dry January, is take 30 days off if you're a regular drinker, or even if you're not a regular drinker, and see the impacts and the benefits that being alcohol free has on your life.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point too, these studies that come out, I love it when people are asking me about studies that support the drinking of alcohol and like, oh, but it contains, like you were saying, resveratrol, at least for wine, or there's this study that says, drinking in moderation is actually healthy for you. And, it's one study, maybe. And that I don't feel like is enough significant evidence to say that drinking is healthy. And I just want to make sure, I mean, that goes for anything, right? But I just want to make sure that people really understand that you can't read one study. First of all, really look at the study, like look who's funding it, look at the cohort, the number of people, all of that information. But also, you have to have other studies and other types of studies to make sure that that one study is valid. It can't just be, a one-off thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. And I think Holly talks about that a little bit in the book, is big tobacco and their kind of cover-ups of the harmful effects of smoking, and similar to how the alcohol industry has
Yeah.
made alcohol seem sexy and fun and kind of not really delved into how alcohol can be harmful, other than that this substance may be addictive. But now we're seeing that alcohol is linked to something like 7 different types of cancer, and that it creates numerous health problems and psychological and physiological. Alcohol can be incredibly harmful for people's relationships.
And also, we all know the effect that alcohol has on liver health. It's actually the leading cause of cirrhosis. And for those who don't know, cirrhosis is end stage liver disease. So it's responsible for liver related deaths worldwide. So I think a lot of people, they know how bad it is for their liver, but I don't think they know to the extent of how bad it can be. Also, people that have fatty liver have worse like lipid profiles than the majority of the public. And it can also, like you were saying, Mary, obviously increase risk for certain cancers and mortality. So, overall, it's, as you said, it's a first class carcinogen. It's not something that we necessarily want to be just, I feel like, being so free about. Like it's probably one of the substances that I feel like we consume the most and has it's the least regulated, and socially it's very accepted in our culture. Unlike maybe other things that may be quote unquote safer, but it has more regulation around it.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point that the sobriety community talks a lot about, is alcohol is the only substance you have to justify not taking. So when people are choosing not to drink alcohol for whatever reason, or they're sober and they're going out in public and people offer them a drink, we get this kind of pervasive peer pressure where people will say, "Why? Why aren't you drinking? Come on, just have a drink." And
Yeah.
everybody wants you to partake with them. And the comparison is, if you were a heroin addict and you were at a party and you said, "No, I'm actually not going to be doing heroin tonight," you would get a lot of congratulations, not a lot of peer pressure. So it's the only substance really that, again, is super harmful that we have to justify in social situations to not take. And yeah, and to the detriment, what we were discussing about alcohol's detrimental physical effects, obviously cirrhosis is kind of one of the more end stage, but there are really subtle issues on down the line. Like a lot of first line issues that people notice are like nutrient deficiencies, like especially B vitamins and minerals. People who drink tend to flush a lot of their B vitamins and a lot of minerals easily. And so it can create these sort of minuscule deficiencies along the way before you might notice something that is truly problematic.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And also it can affect your gut too. The not just the absorption of these really important nutrients, but also one of the things I found fascinating when I started learning about this is, amino acids make up the building blocks of your neurotransmitters, which are, your hormones. So if you cannot digest and break down like proteins and then also vitamins and minerals that are cofactors for these proteins to help build these really important hormones, then how are you supposed to get someone sober? How are you supposed to get the motivation? How are you supposed to get I don't know, just the feeling of like, I can do this, right? Like that internal, like, how would you say it, Mary? Just having the experience with that.
Well, yeah. So amino acids, when we eat protein, as you said, it gets broken down into amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks to our neurotransmitters in our brain, like serotonin and dopamine and GABA. And we have neurotransmitters that are responsible for our mood and our sex drive, appetite regulation, our motivation. And one reason that certain people are more drawn to alcohol and substances, or have more of a tendency to abuse alcohol, is because often If you
Mm.
have neurotransmitter deficiencies or your body isn't producing enough of your feel good, neurotransmitters are like our feel good biochemicals, our feel good
Yeah.
chemical messenger system that we have. So if we're not producing enough of these really important substances internally, our brain naturally seeks outside substances that are going to help boost those neurotransmitters temporarily so that we do feel good. And alcohol, for one, increases GABA in the brain. And GABA is our calming neurotransmitter. And then there are certain other substances, even like shopping or any kind of
Mm.
addiction, food, shopping, sex. So if we're not producing enough of these feel good transmitters, our brain will find a way for us to boost those transmitters, neurotransmitters through other means. And so that's why some people have more of a tendency to abuse substances because as soon as they experience that, their immediate feeling is, oh, gosh, I feel normal again. And
Yeah.
then your brain keeps screaming for those substances so that you do feel calm or feel normal.
Yeah, and it's probably not just substances, but also like addictive behaviors as well that can be caused by, the lack of deficiency in some of these nutrients. Like we were just talking about yesterday, like, I may not be prone to, want to, reach for alcohol, but I have had eating disorders in the past, right? So I feel like those are all a form of altered brain chemistry where perhaps maybe some of my deficiencies or my inability to absorb certain vitamins or minerals or whatever it may be caused those kind of behaviors.
Yeah, 100%. And that can be true for depression and anxiety also. Any kind of mood imbalance can be related to deficiencies or inadequacies in producing some of these neurotransmitters. So we talk a lot about brain chemistry when we're talking about substance abuse or recovery. And there's this huge gut brain connection going back to the gut and the health of the gut and the brain are so connected, and taking care of your digestion and taking care of gut health really supports brain health and mood. And alcohol can cause a lot of inflammation in the gut, and it can also destroy a lot of your beneficial bacteria that you need to digest foods and to also make serotonin. Something like 90% of serotonin, which is one of your feel good neurotransmitters, is produced in the gut.
So I always thought that dry January was something that could be really positive, especially for people who do drink a lot and, may need that break. But it was interesting because we were talking offline, you were actually mentioning some reasons why it may be problematic.
Yeah, I follow a lot of my colleagues in the sobriety community, and one in particular mentioned that doing these dry months, dry January and sober October, which I think anytime you examine your relationship with a substance or alcohol or something that you use on a regular basis, I think it's always beneficial. But her point was if you have to really work hard to take 1 month off alcohol and you're only waiting for the month to be over so you can start drinking again, maybe that is a sign that you need to examine your relationship with alcohol. Because something else in the sobriety community that I've always appreciated is they say, create a life that you don't have to escape from. And so that's something in the community, especially Laura McCowan, who wrote the book, We Are the Luckiest. She has always said, the whole point of We Are the Luckiest is we are lucky because we don't have to use substances to improve our mood. We show up authentically every day in this sober way, and we don't need to use a substance to escape. So it's thinking about
Mm-hmm.
this whole paradigm of creating a life you don't have to escape from by using alcohol to dull out your senses or as a crutch to have at the end of a hard day, using alcohol in that way. Whereas you mentioned you're using alcohol in a social setting, which is what we would consider probably normal drinking, right? But people who are coming home at the end of a long day and just using it to numb out or using it when
Yeah.
you're upset or using it when you're depressed. Alcohol is always there. It's there when you're unhappy, it's there when you're celebrating, it's there when you need to escape. And so, really examining our relationships in that way with this substance, I think is a very positive thing when you're doing these sober challenges or these dry months. But the point that I did think was interesting is if it's hard for you and you struggle with avoiding alcohol for a month, maybe it's time to examine your relationship with it in that way too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And not to digress too much, but like I mentioned, didn't have a very strong relationship or really very educated around alcohol and the really challenges around those who do drink a lot until I dated someone who did. And it's been a few years now. I was in a relationship with someone who did abuse alcohol and did drink a lot. And we were living in a big city. We were going out a lot. I didn't think it was abnormal because that's what you do. But it got to the point where we would go out consistently, and every time he would end up blacking out. And I had never been with someone like that. I've never blacked out in my life. I didn't really understand what that was or what happens. Whole behavior would change. It was like he turned into a completely different person. It was like Jekyll and Hyde. And it got to the point where it was incredibly dangerous to be around him during those times. And it got very, very scary. And I learned a lot of lessons, but I also really saw, I mean, I can look back at it now and beyond, putting my own like safety aside from what occurred, I can also now look at it and see him for being someone that was struggling with this, but unfortunately at the time couldn't admit it. And, I saw the highs and lows and what it did to his life, his personal life. And it was incredibly sad to see. And it's never like something I could really understand, like how someone could allow that to happen. But just from my own personal experience, like I can now understand how alcohol like ruins relationships and not just romantic relationships, as you were saying, Mary. Like it could be obviously family, it could be friendships, it could be everyone in their lives. But it was just like an experience I had never encountered before.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And while you were talking about that, it was reminding me of how we actually address addictive behaviors and alcohol use disorder in this country. Addiction has been so stigmatized. And there's this example of how people who go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings are hiding down in basements, and there's this really big feeling of shame, just enshrouded in secrecy. And how if you have alcohol use disorder or any kind of addictive behavior, you need to hide it from people. You got to deal with it on your own. And no one sets out to become an addict of anything. And I think now the tides are changing on that, where people are really speaking out about their difficulties and creating these communities where people feel comfortable sharing and coming out of the dark basements and being more open about their struggles with addictive behaviors. Because, like you were mentioning, it ruins relationships. That's one of the benefits of doing these sober months is seeing improvements all across the board, improvements in your relationships, really thinking about how alcohol impacts your life. There are so many health benefits. Just even taking a month off drinking, you see improvements in sleep, in energy, in
Hmm.
productivity, in focus. Your energy levels are much better. The sleep issue is really what keeps a lot of people going, because I work with a lot of women in recovery, and
Mm.
that's often the first thing they notice.
Yeah, for sure. As you're speaking, I'm like, this sounds very familiar. And I can't help but like also think about those those benefits you were mentioning. It's very much like when you ask people to, stay away from sugar or stay away from, you know, fill in the blank. But when it's food related, we all know sugar is very addictive. It's a very addictive substance. I believe it's been compared to cocaine to a certain extent and how it lights up the brain. And also has a lot of those benefits, right? Because if anyone's ever stayed away from, added sugars for 30 plus days, you see the difference in improvement in your sleep. You see the differences in energy. You see maybe not, have it affect your weight, but mood for sure, cravings decrease. It can be life-changing for some people as well.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, too, I wanted to just talk about a few tips to help if you're out there
Mm,
listening and you're doing a dry January or you're thinking about doing a dry month, because certainly some people, this is a very individual process. Some people would have no trouble at all staying away from alcohol for a month. And there are also what's called gray area drinkers. And the gray area drinkers are people who may, by societal standards, not have a problem with alcohol, but maybe they're drinking 5 nights a week. Maybe they're drinking 2, 3 glasses of wine 5 nights a week. And they're still 100% functional from the outside. It's not actually affecting their lives that much, but it is enough to where when they decide that they want to stop drinking, maybe it's a little bit more difficult for them. So, one thing about taking 30 days off is we know that I think there's a saying out there that it takes 21 days to break a habit. I mean, I personally find it's more like 30 to 40 days. So the longer that you stick with it, the easier it gets.
mhm,
But something that we would talk about when I was coaching for the sobriety group is there's always what was called kind of the witching hour. And that's when alcohol cravings hit. For a lot of people, that's
mm,
around, 3, 4, 5 p.m. And that's often because people who do have more of a tendency to overuse alcohol tend to have blood sugar issues. They tend to be more hypoglycemic or be more sugar sensitive. And when you drink alcohol, you're getting a quick sugar hit. And so that stabilizes your blood sugar and it improves your mood. So, one thing that I used to coach on is to make sure that your blood sugar levels are staying stable. And that means having a high protein breakfast, eating in regular intervals throughout the day. And when the cravings hit at 3, 4, 5 p.m., have a protein snack. And that sounds maybe simplistic, but protein really helps to stabilize your blood sugar. And oftentimes that can be enough to just quell a craving. The other thing that quells cravings is just wait 15 minutes. And that sounds, again, kind of simplistic, but cravings often pass in as little as 15 minutes. So if you distract yourself during the witching hour when your cravings hit and replace the alcohol behavior with another behavior, like even going for a walk, which people used to make fun of us for saying that because it was like, oh, yes, when I really want a glass of wine, I'm just going to go for a walk. But honestly, it's not the act of going for the walk, it's distracting yourself through the
yeah.
craving and waiting for the 15 minutes to pass. And oftentimes, if you distract yourself, you forget. So make sure to pay mind to your blood sugar, your daily routines, find something to distract you, wait the 15 minutes.
I have a question as you're talking about all of this with cravings and a lot of what we had mentioned earlier were deficiencies, right? So, as someone who works with this population, Mary, would you recommend some kind of multivitamin or maybe a B complex or something to help give them more nourishment?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I would always recommend definitely is B vitamins, which are beneficial for your nervous system, an omega fatty acid to help reduce inflammation and really
Mm,
support brain health. So, the number one question, of course, is always how much damage have I done to my liver and how long will it take my liver to recover normal health? And really, your liver is an incredibly resilient and regenerative organ. And there are a lot of classic herbs out there, like milk thistle is the big one we hear about that help. Milk
dandelion.
thistle, yeah, and the milk thistle is a really powerful liver protective herb, and burdock and some of these other really powerful herbs that can have both a protective effect and a detoxifying effect. And then N-acetylcysteine is an amino acid that's actually really
Mm,
good for liver
yes.
health. Certain medicinal mushrooms can be good. So there's a lot of formulas out there that can be liver supportive, but in my opinion, people worry. It depends obviously on how much alcohol you're using, but people worry too much about that when in really just focusing on the brain chemistry piece, the blood sugar piece, replacing some of the lost nutrients, and really this focus on routine. Get up, make sure you stay really hydrated during the day, do hot water with lemon in the morning, which is really good detoxifier. It's great for your skin. And just making sure that you're staying hydrated and creating kind of new routines in your life every day, new daily little habits where you're going to replace that time that you were drinking with something else that's going to be beneficial. And that can even be also finding new mocktails or new drinks. There are so many really good drinks out there, like these CBD drinks that can be really calming and relaxing. There's one I like called Day Tripper. So there are a lot of alternatives and mocktail and alcohol-free alternatives out there right now that can be really beneficial too.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to necessarily only be like addressing people who have like a drinking problem, right? I want to make sure that we're also talking to people who are just curious, who are like normal, normal people who drink alcohol socially and just also want to protect their liver health. So I think everything you said applies to anyone who drinks alcohol, period, because we know that there is no safe level of consuming alcohol. So I think everything you said could be applicable to anyone, correct?
Oh yeah, there's a whole movement now called the sober curious movement. And so it's
Right.
people again who may not be classically defined as having alcohol use disorder, but they're just curious about what a life without
Yeah.
alcohol is like. And
Yeah. Yeah.
oftentimes these sober challenges are really beneficial for people who are sober curious because it allows them to kind of take part in a group challenge and see removing alcohol and being sober curious, the benefits that they actually get.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just even thinking from a place of moderation rather than just complete elimination. So like for me, I don't think I'll ever give up alcohol just because I do like the social component of it, but I also know that it doesn't necessarily affect my life in a negative way. But what I do find is I try to stay away from cocktails as much as possible because the combination of alcohol and sugar together is like horrific for my body and how I feel in the day after. And so if I, tend to have it with like just club soda or with lime or something like that, the effects are completely different and they're much more negated.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, for you, you're not even a gray area drinker. You've never had any kind of issue giving up alcohol for any period of time at all. So yeah, for people out there who are looking kind of for more support around heading into sober January, I mentioned too the mocktails. There are so many alcohol-free alternatives out there. Elixirs, there's one called Apothecary. I think there's one called Curious Elixirs. And they're designed to, a lot of them have adaptogenic herbs in them. So,
Mm-hmm.
adaptogenic herbs are herbs that help your body reduce stress levels and give you kind of a really relaxing and mood elevating feeling. So, they're trying to use these mocktails to replace the mood boosting effects of alcohol, and people love them. I've tried some of them. They are really relaxing. They have these adaptogenic herbs. Some of them have CBD, which
Mm-hmm.
again is kind of like a non-THC, doesn't give you like a psychoactive high like marijuana or THC does, but it is really relaxing to the body. And then there are some of these THC drinks too that have really low dose amounts of cannabis or THC in them. So there's a lot of options out there if you're looking for kind of a mood elevating or mood boosting or relaxing.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to Google kind of alcohol free tonics. Those are the two that I like, the Apothecary and the Curious Elixirs. But there are so many alternatives now just because this kind of sober curious movement and this alcohol free movement has really taken off.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago I had a surgery and I couldn't drink for 3 months. And it was right actually in the middle of New Year's. And I remember, being with all my friends and they're buying all this alcohol. And I was like, well, I can't drink anything. And I was in LA. And what I noticed when I did like a quick Google search was there's more of these mocktail, not even mocktail, but it was non-alcoholic like beverage stores popping up. So there are these little boutique stores that literally just sell non-alcoholic champagne, non-alcoholic wine, non-alcoholic mocktails, or like you were saying, tonics, Mary. And I actually went into one of the stores and it was super cute, super bougie. But the sales rep was so nice and I got to test so many different products and it was so fun and I could not believe how good they all tasted. And I didn't know that they didn't contain alcohol. I wouldn't know the difference. Like the champagne tasted exactly the same. It was pretty amazing. But it also contained those for like additive adaptogens and herbs, like you were saying, that kind of helps with the calming effect. So it gives it a similar vibe. But I thought it was a genius idea. Now I'm starting to see them pop up all over the country.
Yeah, and a lot of them are really beneficial too and have sort of liver supportive properties, the herbs that they put in. And it's really nice, a nice feeling that you have these specific drinks or elixirs that actually have health benefits to them instead of like alcohol, which has health robbing effects. And the other thing I was thinking
Yeah.
about when you were mentioning that, some of these mocktails can get pretty pricey, but
Yeah.
one big benefit I was thinking another big benefit of sober January or any kind of sober challenge is that you do save a lot of money financially because alcohol and going out gets expensive.
Yeah.
So,
Being
you
a
know,
cheap date is amazing.
yeah, and you really only need, you know, some people who are going out, they're drinking three, four or more drinks in a sitting. And even though some of these alcohol free elixirs can get pretty pricey, you're only going to drink one, probably, or two at the most. So the financial aspect and the other really great benefit that I didn't mention earlier is the vanity reason to quit alcohol because you can really age in reverse when you stop drinking alcohol. It's so
Oh
dehydrating.
yeah.
It ages you. It damages your DNA, which is how it creates
Yeah.
disease in the body. And so just going sober for 30 days and staying hydrated and combating alcohol's dehydrating effects by not drinking at all, but also just staying well hydrated throughout the month, you really notice huge differences in your skin and
Yeah.
youthfulness and just feeling better in your body.
Yeah, there are studies that I've seen that shows that alcohol definitely accelerates like wrinkles
Oh yeah,
and
accelerates
photo aging
aging
of the skin on a
in a huge
cellular level.
way.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, I mean, that was my number one motivation if I needed it. It was like you said, just pure vanity, but yeah, there's a huge correlation.
Yeah, and again talking about support, there's a few books we mentioned here. So one being Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker, definitely worth a read. I'm actually mentioned in the book in the nutrition section. And This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. So she also runs some sober challenges. You can look her up online. I've recommended a lot of people to her book and to her online sobriety support communities. There's a lot of these support communities now that take more of a holistic approach and teach you how to change your behavior, kind of neural reprogramming, where you're literally fusing new neuronal pathways in the brain that when you do so, old habits fall away and you're replacing them with new habits and kind of learning how to hack your brain in this way. But there's one called The Luckiest Club, and that's Laura McCowan's. I mentioned her book, We Are the Luckiest. There's one called The Tempest. And then Annie Grace online, she has her sobriety support community. So there are many options rather than going to in-person meetings, which if that's your thing, that's great too. But there's a lot of online support community options where you can even get sober coaches to help you or just join like-minded community to help keep you motivated.
And are these resources, Mary, specifically for women or is it for everyone?
They is for everyone. There are women specific communities within these pods of sober communities, but they are inclusive. Anyone can join.
Hmm. That's good to know. Yeah. I learned so much from you about this topic, and I think it's really interesting. So thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of experience like you in relationships with alcohol use disorder. It's all over my family. I've struggled with it myself in the past. So I have a really intimate understanding of how alcohol affects your brain chemistry and what drives addictive behaviors and actually how to change them. And I mentioned AA earlier, which is just talk therapy. And while that's a really great modality that works for a lot of people, what we are learning about addictive behaviors is that it is a physiological disease. So
Mm.
we really want to address the underlying causes of what is driving alcohol use disorder or any addictive behavior. And we were talking about earlier, a lot of it can be brain chemistry related and just really focusing on nourishment and getting enough protein, for example, so that your body has the raw materials to make these feel good neurotransmitters, correcting any deficiencies like the B vitamins, and really looking at everybody's different, but looking at kind of the underlying physiological reasons why people are attracted to substances in the first
Mm.
place. And that, along with the community and the talk therapy, seems to be the most successful model.
So if anyone has any additional questions for Mary, because I'm definitely not an expert on this topic, I can drop them below either on YouTube or Instagram, and I'll make sure that Mary can address them.
Yeah, this is a topic, especially women and helping women overcome alcohol use disorder or binge drinking is something that I'm really starting to focus on more in my own practice. And I've been studying brain chemistry for 15 plus years now, so I have a really intimate understanding of it. And yeah, we'd love to hear in the comments section any helpful resources you might have that you'd like to share with others or any questions you have for us.
Thanks, Mary.
Okay, you're welcome.